we're going to have, actually have 30 minutes of your time to take you through the points Conrad already introduced. I was thinking 30 minutes, it's a long time, can be a long time. So I was thinking about how to break the ice, and I was inspired by this actually picture that Conrad, actually Eric, sent me yesterday for two different reasons. One is that the color of the background happened to be exactly the same color of my shirt. I think even the fabric, and that it was already planned to be this shirt and today. So it gives good vibe. It's just a coincidence, but it feels good. And the second one was the Scandinavian mine name, which actually I wasn't clear it was the name of a company. I thought it was linked to the organization of the title of the event. I later learned it's a company. But it took me to the mind, of course, flying to Helsinki, Scandinavian, transformation, textile, I connected dots. So I was thinking, what tricks in my mind when I think about this word, textile, transformation, and Scandinavian. And of course, I think about 4 large countries, which are conventionally associated as Scandinavian countries, at least in Italy, the country where I'm from. And I was going one by one, and I thought about, let's maybe start with Denmark, Copenhagen. It's a city, of course, it's a capital. It's home of global platforms to discuss fashion transformation. Is actually, from a legislative point of view, relevant for something called the European Environmental Agency, which probably no one here knows about it. But it's a very important player, because it's an agency of the European Union, which makes studies, analyzes data, and populated by very motivated, passionate people about what they do. They shed lights on what's the true environmental impact of textile production globally. And actually, I'm even grateful to them, because there used to be this myth, the second most polluting industry in the world. I'm sure some of you heard about that before, which is a myth in the sense that is not substantiated by any data. Is it the second, the third, the first? They made a good report. They analyzed anything, water, soil, chemicals, and they came up with the figures and say the 4th largest impact sector after others, and they provide more information on where this happened, which process in textiles, which part of, is it Europe, is it global? Data is exactly what we need to drive this transformation, facts rather than slogan. Sweden, Stockholm, Kemi or Kemi, I never know how to pronounce this in Swedish. It's home of one of the most active regulatory agency for chemical legislation in Europe. So chemicals are being regulated for many good reasons. Kemi is one of the most active when it comes to chemicals, especially in fashions. And one of my first business trips to Stockholm, I went to the office, I was even late, and I was impressed by the mission they undertake on them. They felt the pressure to educate the industry and drive this global transformation when it comes to chemical registration. Nowadays, they've been active on specific restriction on dye stuff, on the color that you use in garments, which is some pros and cons from our standpoint, and perhaps should also take into account the importance not just of making legislation, but also make sure everybody complies with that we don't have free riders. In Norway, Oslo is the capital. Norway is not a member of the European Union, but has the same legislation as part of the European Economic Area. In Oslo, the interest for, again, chemicals perhaps and pollutants in waters can be dated as back as 1972, more than 50 years ago, on something that now evolved in the OSPAR Convention. So the attention to avoid dumping chemicals in water, later on soils, as a history in that country, which is, of course, also home of very active companies, just like in Sweden and Denmark, obviously, when it comes to recycling fibers, when it comes to building a textile recycling value chain, fashion brands, of course, just like also in Sweden, obviously, and very good chemical companies. Which take us to Finland. Creativity, pure and simple. Whether you like or not like creativity, you cannot forget it once you've seen it, even if you try. Of course, that's a joke about small things we have seen perhaps recently, but creativity is really what I pick up in Finland over the last years. Creativity and sense of initiative. The time pressure felt in Finland to do something with textile waste, which I think started without regulatory pressures. It's the first case we have in the European Union. The connection built between, I think, 38 municipalities to organize the collection of textile waste, the support from the academia, VTT, but many others, the companies which have been founded in this country to transform pulp or textile waste into new material, is really impressive. And of course, Finland, Helsinki, it's also home of ECHA, the European Chemical Agency making legislation on chemicals. So all across this, we see basically combination of business initiatives, legislative initiatives, and very, very much motivated people. We have something similar in the city where I live, which is Brussels, in Belgium, of course, which is the political capital of the European Union, home of the European Parliament, the Council, the Commission. What these are represent the people, the governments, and the government of the EU itself. We work there, Eurotex, where I belong, where I'm director of the sustainability area for 7 years. What we do, we basically speak to the institution and advise on what the business needs to drive this transformation that we discussed today. Of course, they're not waiting for us to take initiative. They took the initiative, as Conrad already mentioned, and we have a lot of legislation that we are discussing with our members, such as TIECO in Sweden, in Norway, or STJM in Finland. We also work with our partner, like Inditex in the fashion side, I mean, and for a few weeks also Hugo Boss. So we speak to the industry directly or indirectly through our members, and then we discuss what has to be done to accelerate this transformation, which is now pretty much looking like this. It's a big picture, sorry for that. We have 16 pieces of legally binding action now being designed, either being renewed or brand new. That's a lot, because it goes across all the board, from what kind of chemical emission you have in waters, if you are producing or finishing a fabric, how do you control your supply chain, what chemicals you use, how do you deal with waste, what quality you put in the product, how you talk to your consumers. All of that is happening at the same time, which could be good, because when we do something, we are supposed to look at other sides, but quite frankly, it's also overwhelming, because our members and us, we work around the clock to keep just track of what's happening, not to mention to come up with proposals. Let me go down to 3 of these boxes in the interest of time. The first, and perhaps most innovative, is the so-called Ecodesign regulation. In jargon, stands for ESPR. Apologies, in Brussels, they love acronyms. You're going to see acronyms all the time. This picture, that it's online, you don't need to take picture, you're welcome to, of course, but we released it through social media. Why? Because companies don't follow that. It's too complex. So this is the super concise version, this box, of 100+ pages of regulation proposals. And these 2 pictures that you see there, it's the summary of the summary. It's what perhaps can help you to retain some elements of what this legislation wants to do. It wants to increase durability, quality of products, particularly textiles and particularly garments. A diamond is a symbol of durability. So it doesn't want, of course, to make garments lasting forever, but it would change the way garments are made. To give an example, nowadays, I can buy a shirt, this color or another color, and this color can actually fade after the first washing. As long as it is safe, it's not illegal. Of course, it's a cheat to the consumer. We don't have minimum legal requirements when it comes to the quality of products. That's what this law wants to change. So there will be introduced minimum quality requirements, which might include obligation for durability, obligation for recycled content, perhaps, in the garment. And if you don't comply with that, you cannot sell in the EU territory, no matter if you're a European company or comes from any other part of the world. It also brings along a thing called digital product passport, symbolized by a QR code here. So you are a consumer, you will scan a product and you will be learning where does it come from, what it's made of, perhaps what substances are in there, perhaps where different steps were made, the spinning, the weaving, the finished product making, how to take care of it, and other aspects. We are negotiating what will be in the system, but the Commission is already developing the IT infrastructure to have that. What we really hope is that through the excuse, so to say, of this digital product passport, we not only are able to inform consumers, but we are finally able to have traceability across the value chain. It's easy to say the consumer shall be informed, but how you get to all this information from the chemical supplier somewhere in another continent, all the way through the different steps, the fiber, the yarn, the fabric, the finish on the fabric, the finished product, it's a big challenge. Big companies have the system, small companies try to find their way. If I talk to my client, I need to give data in some way. If I talk to another company in a different way, we need to fix this. And we hope the digital product passport will enable that. We also ask very much for what we call level playing field. Everybody has to play with the same rules. There's no point in making legislation if nobody's checking that those legislation are actually applied by everybody. And when you have about 28 billion of garments circulating in the EU and the UK and Switzerland on average every single year, it's a little bit of a challenge. I think today you control 0.0 something of all the garments which circulates in the EU. That has to change as well. Green claim. That's one of the latest, but not the last one, proposal of legislation we're going to have this year. It was put forward on the 22nd of March. We're still trying to digest it. What it does, it wants to stop greenwashing. Meaning, if I am a brand and I sell a product and I say, my jacket is green or sustainable, legally I can do that until I'm not really cheating with the consumer, but I don't have any legal obligation to demonstrate why am I saying that my product is green, whatever that might mean. What this legislation wants to do is to oblige companies to justify their statements based on scientific data, based on key parameters, which are also harmonized across Europe. Because that's also another problem. I'll touch upon that in a moment. They also want to avoid proliferations. That means that every brand goes on with his own way of justifying their claims, because that doesn't help the consumer. How can I understand if the way brand X or brand Y measure water consumption the same way? This is what this legislation aims to do. It's very ambitious, and not only look at the claim on the product, but in principle, also the claim of the brand would have to be justified. So I no longer can say, by 2025, I want to be the best for that, or I want to do this. I need to justify that, which probably means we're going to have way less claims in the near future, because companies will have to think twice, but perhaps more reliable, and then we can trust them. In theory, this could be finished by 2024, because, by the way, that's when the current commission is going to complete its mandate. And we're really excited to see if this can go through. If we talk about greenwashing, green claims, there are 4 issues I'd like to draw your attention on. We have seen countries like the Netherlands fining large bespoke brands because they didn't like the way their statements were made. We have seen yesterday morning, I think, The Guardian spoke about this worthless claim about offset, this compensation system. I do something here, but I compensate because I do something else somewhere else. Research was questioning that, not authorities, different things. We see how standard convergence is absolutely important. That means if you are a company, supplier, different brands, you need to have harmonized system to collect data. You can't have a situation where everybody's asking different data in different ways, because you cannot just provide this information and you cannot receive it. And the last picture shows about this green, yellow, red, that if any of you ever bought a washing machine or use a washing machine notice that, which is a way to inform consumer on how energy efficient the product is. Something similar is actually in Belgium being introduced on food. It's called Nutri-Score. I don't know if in Finland or in Sweden exist. But these are also, could be cheating based on, intentionally or unintentionally, based on how these parameters are calculated. So these are the four or some of the issues this legislation aims to fix. There is also a proposal which deals with the so-called product environmental footprint path, which, if available and when available, would basically guarantee compliance with that legislation. So it's a methodology that basically has many different indicators, parameters, eutrophication, or you see here, impact on marine life, for instance. So it's a method that looks at all these 16 key performance indicators and defines specific rules to allow comparing similar products. I will not be able to compare a shirt with pants or jacket with boots, but I can compare a jacket with jacket. It's a complex methodology. It's called life cycle assessment. There are different life cycle assessments. This one was developed as many as, I guess, 15, 20 years by scientists, but has not been largely used because it's complex and because you need to define the specific rules based on how, for instance, the use of recycled content impact on one product, on one material, or the others. So there is a consortium called Technical Secretariat. You see here some logos, where you see large brands, where you see the French Environmental Agency Authority, the Commission as observer, Eurothics is part of that, the wool industry, other industry, EB, it's an NGO, which is an observer, and Quantis, it's a consulting company specialized on life cycle assessment. So what this group is doing for almost 3 years already is developing the specific rules so that we can compare garments. The ambition is that this will be completed by next year, at least a draft of that, and that can be used by everybody in the market to justify their claims. If you notice the brands present in these logos, it shows that there is critical mass here. It's not a small laboratory scale company which is trying to put forward a life cycle assessment. It's quite a large critical mass. And that's interesting because one of the things I believe we need in this transformation is not only good ideas and good solutions, but we need to scale this up. We need this to become the norm, the standard, use a large scale. Interesting, it's about data. If you're a company, I will not cease to repeat that, you need to provide information. You will have information that the companies might look for, the energy consumption, the water consumption, the material they use. It's called primary data, and then there will be other data which will be provided by the European Commission for free in a database, which is being updated as we speak. Last point on legislation, it's about EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme. This is linked with waste, and it's linked to something called Waste Framework Directive, which is going to be updated soon. And that comes to the point that a few years ago, a law said you must collect discarded textiles separately. What you do with paper, glass, plastic, you also have to do this in Europe, in the European Union territory for garments, for textiles. As of the 31st December 2024, basically in 18 months. The problem is that the law put the obligation to do that, but nobody thought about the simple question, what are we going to do with that? We cannot burn it, because we don't have the capacity to burn it all. We cannot landfill. Landfill is one of the worst words you can speak about in Brussels, if you walk in the parliament. It's like an insult. And we cannot eat it, obviously. So what do we do with 7.5 million tons of textile waste that are estimated to be generated every year in the EU, and are projected even to increase to 9 million tons over the next 8 years? interestingly, that's maybe a bit technical, but the Commission will make a proposal to harmonize this EPR scheme, so the system to take care of this waste. The proposal will come, we expect, the 28th of June, so it's tomorrow, basically. But France is already doing that. And Italy and the Netherlands are quite advanced in making their own national legislation for that. And in other countries, there are discussions. That is the case in, for instance, Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, Germany, I guess also Czech Republic. Some of the countries that we see here are in the making. Other 4 countries, France, Italy, Spain, and the Netherlands, they're already setting what we call, let's say, PRO, sorry, another acronym, consortia. So groups of companies which come together and try to find a solution for this textile waste. So they will collect a certain amount of money for each garment sold in the market. So you pay 10 euro, XYZ cents or euro goes to this consortia, and with this money they will organize the collection, the sorting, the informations, the support, everything which is needed to find a solution for this waste. France, Refashion, it's an interesting case, exists for 15 years. They organized largely the collection of these discarded textiles. They went from virtually nothing to 40% of the textile discarded garments discarded in France are being collected. But they don't have a solution what to do with that. A lot of that is re-exported, is sold, second-hand market. Along the principle of the reuse, it's even better than recycling, absolutely. But the same is going to happen in all other member states of Europe. And we don't have a market which can absorb so many discarded garments. They're going to have a budget of 1.2 billion euro in the next 6 years to finance the collection, sorting, and recycling of garments. Potentially, they can even pay back brands based on how sustainable the brand's products are. And again, these are examples, this picture of what's happening in the other countries that I mentioned. One important thing we believe is that while these consortia are being created in different countries, and making an example, Finland does not have one, because for the time being they already have, we understand, their business plan to operate that. We need to have harmonized systems again. Because if you're a company, you don't want to have a rule in France, a rule in Finland, a rule in Italy, and so on and so forth. That makes no sense. And that's not something you can comply with. That's one issue. The second issue, what are we going to do with this money? You need to find different activities. We believe these funds should also be used to finance this transformation. Transformation is a cost for a company to become more digital, to be able to use a digital product passport, to be able to inform the consumer, to be able to exchange data. This has a cost. Recycling. Recycling is extremely complex for many reasons. This has a cost, and this is potentially a large funding source that we can use for that. But we need harmonization, and that's why we hope that the new EU law, which will be proposed in June, will help harmonize in the system. The last point I wanted to touch upon this morning is rehabs. This is not legislation. It's not one of the 16 boxes. It's, if you like, the 17th box. It's something Eurotex launched with its members already 3 years ago. And it's a business initiative to find a solution to the question, what are we going to do with 7.5 million tons of textile waste? Typically, I love this subject. It's one of my favorite. I make a 10-15 minutes presentation only on that. I'm not going to do this morning, don't worry. I make a summary in one slide only. The issue being, we have a lot of waste to deal with. We have reuse come first, but recycling is necessary because any product, as many times as you want to reuse, even if you have higher quality, because you have new requirements for that, at some point, even this t-shirt, the shirt will cease to exist. So it has to be recycled. For that, we need to expand the recycling value chain, or if you like, building what we call the European textile recycling value chain, which in its infancy exists already today. You have companies doing sorting, collection, sorting, somehow automated sorting. You have a company doing mechanical recycling, thermomechanical or chemical recycling. It's scale, a larger scale, new ideas pops up frequently. Press release, I heard earlier, might even come tomorrow about other companies, but it's small if you compare it with the 7.5 million tons we generate every year. We estimate you need between 150 and 250 new facilities all over Europe. Their capacity might be 20,000 tons, 50 tons, 100,000 tons if it's a large chemical recycling plant. Some businesses have already been building this. Much more has to happen. What we expect is that we could be able to recycle 26% of all discarded textiles by 2030 and generate between 3.5 and 4.5 billions of euro. Half of that in terms of profit, creating new jobs, 15,000 jobs. Half of that coming from the water you don't use, the land you don't need, the chemicals you save. For that, there is a very interesting report from McKinsey that it was released last July 14th, which again set up these 5 key ingredients for this value chain to succeed. Critical of scale, I mentioned this before, real collaboration, funding investments, and a push from the public sectors. We're very excited about this initiative. I think it can also be said it's not really a secret. We even have a Finnish company, Rester, which is part of this initiative. Our member, the Finnish member, has been in the driving seat from the very beginning 3 years ago. We're now setting up a new legal entity which will attract companies which want to invest in this value chain. And we are really much excited because we see the interest is there, the business case is there, the environmental case is there. So that hopefully could also be a solution. What do we waste question? Which takes me to my conclusion. 3 concluding remarks. How to drive this transformation. That was the title in the main the title of the conference. You might recognize, let's start with the picture first, you might recognize some Finnish person here. That's an important point, that's an important message, and the reason why I put this in the slide, because first of all, the textile value chain has an environmental issue to deal with. We need to take the initiative to change that. This is already happening. Rehab is an example. Initiative to tackle microplastic are examples. There are so many initiatives. Taking the initiative is fundamentally important because if you have a problem, the first thing you need to do is to acknowledge the problem and find a solution. Second, we need sound proposals. We need data. We need facts. We don't need slogans and headlines. That's good to motivate, to drive changes, to stimulate changes, but if you want to change how production is made and how consumer will choose what they choose, you need real facts, you need figures and proposal and critical mass. And the last thing, we need to communicate, and that's why I pick up these pictures. I very much appreciate one Finnish company delegate who came to Brussels few months ago and made a very nice presentation about how this systemic change is already happening at small scale, how companies are embracing these changes. And that's also what we need to explain to the policymakers, that we need to be part of these transformations, we have ideas, and we need to be able to communicate. Hopefully there are also companies here that perhaps in the 200 conversation that Conrad suggested before might also help us to communicate these success stories. I will stop here and happy to take any questions or comments later in the panel. Thank you so much for your attention.